It's 4 a.m. You're awake again. You didn't set an alarm, nothing woke you, and yet here you are. Eyes open, heart slightly too fast, staring at a ceiling you know too well. You've tried everything, and it keeps happening. Here's what nobody tells you. Your body isn't broken. It's keeping a record. Not a record of your sleep habits, not a record of how much caffeine you had, or whether your room is dark enough, or if you looked at your phone too close to bedtime. A record of everything you haven't finished feeling. And at 4 a.m., when your conscious mind finally goes quiet, your body opens that record and starts reading it out loud. That's what's waking you. Not insomnia, not stress. A bill that hasn't been paid. Let's start with something most people never hear, because it sounds almost too physical to matter emotionally. Every night, your core body temperature drops. It drops slowly, consistently, hitting its absolute lowest point somewhere between 4 and 5 a.m., sitting nearly 2 degrees below where it was when you were awake. And the moment it stops dropping and starts rising again, your brain registers that shift as a signal. Not an alarm, a biological permission slip. Permission to surface, and so you do. Every single morning at the same hour, your own body is the thing that pulls you back into consciousness. The question isn't why you're waking up. The question is why, when you surface, there's something waiting for you. Because here's where it gets interesting. Your cortisol, the hormone most people call the stress hormone, has been awake longer than you have. Research now shows that cortisol doesn't rise because you wake up. It rises in anticipation of when it expects you to wake up. If you've been waking at 4 a.m. for weeks, your stress hormone has already learned that schedule. It pre-fires. It's already circulating before your eyes open. And that faint anxiety you feel the second you become conscious, that tightness in your chest before you've even had a single thought, that isn't a response to waking up. That's what woke you. You trained your own stress response to run at 4 a.m., and now it's running you. How did it learn? From you. Every time you woke and reached for your phone, every time you turned on a light or let yourself start thinking, every time you treated 4 a.m. like a problem that needed to be solved rather than a signal that needed to be heard. The brain saw activity, logged the hour, and built a trigger. That's not a sleep disorder. That's classical conditioning. The same mechanism that made Pavlov's dog salivate at a bell is now making your cortisol spike at 4 a.m. Can you unlearn it? Yes, but not the way you think. There's something that happened in history that almost no one talks about, because it's uncomfortable for modern people to sit with. Before electric light, before the industrial workday, before the world decided that 8 straight hours was the only acceptable form of sleep, people didn't sleep that way. They slept in 2 pieces, a first sleep and a second sleep, with a natural window of calm wakefulness in between. Historians have found over 500 references to this pattern in ancient and medieval documents, diaries, medical texts, literature, and the language in those documents is striking. The wakefulness between sleeps wasn't described as a problem. It was called the watch. People used it to pray, to write, to reflect on their dreams while they were still vivid. They visited neighbors. Some made love. This wasn't insomnia. It was a demarcated period of nocturnal life. And researchers believe this is still what your body wants to do, given the chance. So what changed? Light. The moment artificial light made staying awake into an evening easy, humans started pushing their bedtimes later and later. The 2-sleep window got compressed into 1 block. The watch disappeared. And the natural mid-sleep waking, which was once a period of quiet reflection, became something to be afraid of. You inherited the biology. You just lost the cultural permission to use it. But there's a layer below the biology that almost nothing in mainstream sleep content ever reaches. And it has to do with what your brain is actually doing at 4 a.m. By the time you wake, you've already completed most of your REM cycles. REM sleep, the stage most associated with dreaming, is front-loaded in the night. Those long, dense dream periods happen closer to midnight. By 4 a.m., your sleep is lighter, and your brain has spent hours doing something most people never realize sleep is for. It's been processing your emotional backlog, integrating memories, connecting experiences, running the unfinished business of your waking life through a system that's been called one of the brain's primary tools for emotional regulation. And when something doesn't resolve, when there's a grief the brain can't file, a fear it can't categorize, an anger that has nowhere to go, light sleep become impossible to maintain. The unresolved thing surfaces, and so do you. What does your brain do the moment it surfaces at 4 a.m.? It activates the default mode network. The DMN is the part of your brain that runs when you're not focused on anything external. It is, in the most literal sense, your brain talking to itself. And for people carrying anxiety or unprocessed loss, the DMN does something specific and almost cruel. It stops generating memories and future plans the way it does during normal mind wandering. Instead, it runs threat simulations. It rehearses conversations that went wrong. It replays decisions made years ago. It projects worst-case futures with the quiet certainty of something it believes to be true. And at 4 a.m., with the prefrontal cortex, the rational braking part of your mind, still largely offline, there's nothing to stop it. The thoughts don't feel like thoughts. They feel like facts. This is why 4 a.m. fear is different from daytime fear. Same thoughts, different brain. One of them can reason, the other one can't. There's a clinical reality here that deserves to be named because millions of people are living inside it without a word for what's happening. There's a specific subtype of depression, not the general flatness that most people associate with the word, called melancholic depression. And one of its defining diagnostic characteristics is early morning awakening, waking at least 2 hours before intended, with a particular quality of dread that begins the moment consciousness returns. Not grogginess, not sadness, dread. Research suggests this happens because the internal circadian pacemaker in these individuals fires too early. The biological clock that governs REM sleep is running ahead of schedule, and the result is a waking that feels imposed, foreign, like something in the body has decided the night is over before the person agreed. This isn't a mindset problem. It isn't a gratitude problem. It is a physiological clock running at the wrong time, and it responds to very different things than a standard sleep hygiene protocol. If 4 a.m. consistently brings a quality of dread you can't name, that distinction matters. It changes what helps. Here's something that two completely different traditions arrived at independently without ever speaking to each other. Traditional Chinese medicine divides the night into 2-hour windows, each assigned to a different organ. The window between 3 and 5 a.m. belongs to the lungs, and in TCM, the lungs are the organ of grief. Practitioners have been telling patients for 2,000 years that waking in that window signals unprocessed sadness, loss that has never been fully acknowledged. Now consider that Western psychiatry, approaching from an entirely different direction, has also linked early morning awakening to emotional loss, to complicated grief, to bereavement, to the physiological disruption that happens when someone who was part of your daily rhythm disappears from your life. Two systems, 2,000 years apart, the same hour, the same emotion. That convergence is worth pausing on, because grief doesn't only come from death. It comes from the version of your life you thought you'd be living by now, from a relationship that ended before you finished loving the person, from a version of yourself that got buried so far under the demands of daily life that you stopped being able to find them. The body carries all of it, and when everything goes quiet at 4 a.m., it surfaces. One piece of research stays with me more than almost anything else in this space. When a person loses someone they have been sleeping next to, through death, through divorce, through any kind of departure, their circadian rhythm doesn't just grieve emotionally, it loses an anchor. Part of how your biological clock stays synchronized to the world isn't just light. It's the presence of another person, their schedule, their sounds, their warmth on the other side of the bed, their voice telling you it's time to sleep. When that person is gone, the clock loses reference points it didn't know it was using, and it drifts into fragmented sleep, into early waking, into hours spent staring at nothing at 4 a.m. without understanding why. You weren't just missing them, your body was missing the time signal they gave you. So what do you do with all of this? You stop trying to fix the waking. You start trying to understand it. You ask what you haven't finished feeling. You ask which part of the night you've been spending trying to avoid a thought rather than following it to its source. You ask whether the dread you feel at 4 a.m. is a symptom of something biological that deserves actual clinical attention. And you consider the possibility that your body isn't malfunctioning, that the ancient part of you that wakes in the dark is doing exactly what it was designed to do, surfacing the things that the daylight hours are too loud and too fast for you to hear.